The morning sun cut through the fog, rolling off San Diego Bay, transforming the Naval Special Warfare Compound into something out of a war film. Sharp shadows stretched across pristine concrete. Clean lines defined every building. Everything precise, everything purposeful. This was Coronado, California, where America trained its most lethal warriors, where boys became SEALs, where legends were born and sometimes died. Captain Bryn Callahan didn't feel legendary. She felt like an imposter wearing someone else's uniform. Her dress blues were crisp enough to cut glass, her posture parade ground perfect, her salute regulation down to the last degree of arc. 37 years old, naval intelligence officer, 15 years of service, 3 deployments to combat zones, a wall of commendations gathering dust in her quarters. On paper, she belonged here. In reality, standing in this conference room, surrounded by SEAL commanders and special operations planners, she felt like a child playing dress-up in her father's closet. The briefing had gone catastrophically wrong. Commander Marcus Hendricks, a brick wall of a man with 22 years in naval special warfare and a chest full of combat medals, had torn apart her tactical assessment in front of the entire planning staff. Not quietly, not privately, publicly, deliberately. With the kind of precision SEALs reserve for eliminating enemy targets. Captain Callahan. His voice had carried that particular edge that meant blood in the water, shark circling, kill shot incoming. Your intelligence analysis suggests we insert here. He jabbed a thick finger at the satellite imagery projected on the screen. That's a kill zone. Any operator worth his trident would see that in 3 seconds. How long did you spend on this assessment? 72 hours, sir. She'd kept her voice level despite the heat creeping up her neck. The AI analysis indicates optimal, the AI. Hendricks had cut us off like a blade through silk. You're recommending we risk American lives based on what a computer told you, based on algorithms that have never jumped out of a helicopter, never taken fire, never carried a wounded brother through a city that wants you dead. The room had gone silent. 20 officers, all men, all watching her drown in real time. Sir, the data supports multiple. The data doesn't bleed, Captain. The data doesn't come home in a box with a flag on top. The data doesn't leave behind a widow and kids who will never see their father again. Hendricks had turned to the Admiral, running the briefing, dismissing her with body language alone. Sir, I recommend we table this assessment and bring in someone with actual operational experience. Someone who understands how warriors fight instead of how computers calculate. Someone with actual operational experience. The words had landed like a blade between her ribs, precise and deadly. She'd stood there, face burning, while the Admiral nodded, while they moved on to the next item. While she became invisible. Again, just another staff officer who didn't understand the real work. Another outsider trying to tell warriors how to fight. Another woman in a space that still questioned whether she belonged. Now, 3 hours later, she walked toward the SEAL dining facility with her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Her shoulders were rigid with tension. Her hands had curled into fists inside her pockets. The galley wasn't just a cafeteria. Everyone knew that. It was sacred ground, a temple to a warrior culture that predated most religions. The walls held decades of SEAL history unit insignias from teams that had operated in jungles and deserts and mountains across 6 continents. Mission patches from operations that would never be declassified, that officially never happened, that saved lives or prevented disasters the public would never know about. Photographs of young men in combat gear, forever 23, forever smiling, forever watching over those who still served. Their eyes followed you, judged you, asked the silent question, have you earned the right to be here? This was a sanctuary, a place where operators could eat in peace surrounded by their own kind. No civilians, no outsiders, no one who hadn't earned the right to breathe this air. Bryn pushed through the door anyway. She needed coffee. She needed quiet. She needed 5 minutes where no one was questioning her competence or her right to wear this uniform or her ability to do the job she'd trained 15 years to perform. The dining facility was half full, maybe 30 people scattered across tables. Afternoon shift. SEALs in various stages of training and operational duty grabbed lunch between briefs and range time and the endless physical conditioning that kept them sharp. The conversation was that particular blend of military banter, technical talk about weapons and tactics mixed with dark humor that came from seeing too much surviving, too much carrying too much. Bryn moved toward the coffee station, deliberately not making eye contact, trying to be invisible, trying not to exist in a space where her presence felt like an intrusion. That's when she saw him, An old man sat alone at a corner table near the tall windows, where November sunlight streamed across weathered features carved by time and violence, and years beyond counting. 80-something, maybe more. Thin gray hair combed neatly, but unable to hide the passage of decades. His face was deeply lined, each wrinkle a story, each scar a memory. The kind of face that had seen the world burn and kept going anyway. He wore a faded blue windbreaker that had seen better decades, probably better centuries. The fabric was thin at the elbows, worn smooth by friction and time. A navy anchor was embroidered on the chest, so faded it was barely visible, like a ghost of pride past. Beneath the jacket, a simple flannel shirt in muted earth tones. Faded jeans that had been washed 1,000 times. White sneakers scuffed at the toes, the kind you bought at discount stores because comfort mattered more than style. Both hands showing the unmistakable tremor of advanced age or old injuries, or both were wrapped around a bowl of soup. He ate with the serene patience of someone who had nowhere else to be and nothing to prove to anyone. Each spoonful deliberate, each movement measured, like he had all the time in the world. Bryn stopped mid-stride, her combat-trained mind immediately shifting into assessment mode. First impression, someone's grandfather brought on base for a family visit who'd taken a wrong turn and wandered into the wrong building. It happened occasionally, despite the security. Confused family members during base tours. Wrong hallways. Ending up in restricted spaces they weren't supposed to see. Usually harmless, quickly resolved with a polite escort back to authorized areas. But something bothered her. The door was clearly marked. Authorized personnel only. NSWG Naval Special Warfare Group. You didn't accidentally wander here. You had to pass through security checkpoints with armed guards. Show identification to people trained to spot discrepancies. Deliberately seek this place out. Post 9/11 security wasn't negotiable. It was paramount. One breach could compromise missions, endanger lives, destroy months of operational planning, cost American lives. Bryn felt her jaw tighten, felt that same frustration from this morning crystallize into something she could actually control. After being humiliated in front of 20 officers, after having her expertise questioned and her competence dismissed, here was something clear. Something regulation. Something she could handle by the book. A security violation she could address. A problem she could solve. She approached the table with purposeful strides, her shoes clicking against the tile floor with military precision. The old man didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her approach, just continued eating his soup with slow, methodical movements, his shaking hands somehow steady enough to complete the simple task of bringing spoon to mouth. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice carried that professional firmness she'd cultivated over 15 years, the tone that said she knew the regulations and intended to enforce them. "This galley is for operators only. Are you authorized to be here?" The old man paused, spoon halfway to his mouth, soup steaming in the afternoon light. He looked up. His eyes were the color of winter sky, that particular shade of blue-gray that came from staring into too many storms. They seemed to absorb everything and reveal nothing. Eyes that had seen things, done things, experienced things beyond normal comprehension. But in that moment, they showed only mild curiosity, like a scientist observing an interesting specimen. "I'm having lunch," he said quietly. His voice was rough, textured like old leather, left too long in harsh conditions. There was a rasp to it, a gravelly quality, as if years of breathing dust and smoke and cordite had worn away youthful smoothness. But beneath the roughness, there was something else. Authority, maybe, or certainty. The voice of someone who'd given orders in places most people would never see. "I understand that, sir." Bryn kept her tone professional but firm, the way they'd taught her at the academy. Polite but unyielding. "But this facility is restricted. Active duty and authorized personnel only. Do you have clearance to be here?" "I have soup." The old man gestured at his bowl with a slight movement of his head. A simple statement delivered without irony or challenge. Just fact presented as if it explained everything. Bryn felt irritation flash through her like electricity, hot and immediate. Her morning had been a series of frustrating disasters. Budget battles in earlier meetings, manning shortages she couldn't solve, political interference in operational decisions, and then Hendricks systematically dismantling her work in front of everyone who mattered. She didn't have time for games. Didn't have patience for someone who couldn't follow basic security protocols. Didn't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with one more problem today. "Sir, I need to see your identification right now." The old man set down his spoon with careful precision, the way you might handle something fragile, reached into his jacket pocket with those trembling hands, pulled out a laminated card, handed it to Bryn without comment, without protest, without any visible emotion on that weathered face. Bryn examined it with practiced efficiency, the kind that came from years of reviewing documents and spotting discrepancies. Department of Defense dependent ID standard issue. The photo matched same carved features, same thin gray hair, perhaps taken a few years earlier, when age hadn't quite finished its work. The name read Declan Thorne. Date of birth, April 3rd, 1943. 82 years old. But something was odd. In the section listing the sponsor's branch and rank blank. Just a dash where information should be. And in the access authorization section, a code Bryn didn't immediately recognize despite her intelligence background and extensive security clearances, SAP-JWIC-1. SAP, Special Access Program, the highest classification level that officially existed. JWIC, Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communication System, top secret and above the kind of access that required presidential authorization. For a fraction of a second, curiosity flickered in Bryn's mind. Why would a dependent ID carry those clearances? What had this man's sponsor done to warrant that level of access? Who was he related to? But her irritation overrode her curiosity, burning hotter than professional interest. After this morning's humiliation, here was something she could control, something she could enforce, a clear violation she could address by the book, authority she could exercise without being questioned or undermined or dismissed. Mr. Thorne, she kept her voice level, professional, the voice of an officer who knew the regulations. This is a dependent EID. This doesn't grant access to operational facilities. You need active duty escort at all times in restricted areas. Do you understand? Oh, the old man reached for his spoon, again those trembling fingers wrapping around the handle. I'm eating soup, sir. Sir, he'd called her sir. That archaic military courtesy from an era when female officers were rare enough that the masculine form still applied universally. Most people her age corrected it. Most people said, ma'am. But something about the way he said it, with complete sincerity, with genuine respect, made it feel less like a mistake and more like a glimpse into a different time. I'm asking you politely to come with me, Bryn said, her patience wearing dangerously thin, fraying like old rope under tension. We'll verify your authorization at the security office. This will only take a few minutes. I haven't finished my soup. The statement was delivered in the same quiet tone, calm as still water. No defiance, no challenge, just simple facts stated as if it were the most important thing in the world. As if finishing his meal mattered more than military regulations or officer directives or anything else happening in this moment. Bryn's patience, already worn thin from her morning, already frayed from Hendricks' public evisceration, already stretched to breaking, finally snapped. She was a naval officer. She'd earned her commission through blood and sacrifice in 4 years at the academy, followed by 15 years proving herself again and again. She'd deployed to war zones. She'd made intelligence assessments that saved lives, that prevented attacks, that made missions possible. She'd carried the weight of command decisions, the burden of knowing that her analysis could mean the difference between men coming home alive or coming home in boxes. And this elderly civilian was treating her like an inconvenience, like a minor annoyance to be ignored while finishing lunch. Like she didn't matter, didn't exist, didn't deserve the basic respect owed to her rank and position. In a space where she already felt like she didn't belong. Where men like Hendricks already questioned her right to be here, questioned her competence, questioned whether a woman could understand warrior culture. Where every mistake was magnified, where every failure was proof that she wasn't good enough, wasn't hard enough, wasn't one of them. Sir. Her voice rose, carrying across the dining facility with command authority. She rarely used the voice of an officer giving orders. This is not a request. Conversation stopped. Silverware paused halfway to mouths. Heads turned. 30 SEALs looked over their trained eyes, assessing the situation, calculating threat levels, processing information the way they'd been conditioned to process everything. This is a direct order. Stand up and come with me. Now. The old man continued eating. Didn't even look up this time. The spoon moved from bowl to mouth with steady rhythm, mechanical and unchanging, as if a naval officer's order meant nothing, changed nothing, as if she once again was invisible, irrelevant, easy to ignore. Bryn felt her face flush hot, felt blood rushing to her cheeks with the force of humiliation and anger mixed into something toxic. In front of 30 operators, men she worked with, men she briefed on intelligence matters, men who needed to respect her authority if she was going to do her job effectively, if she was going to have any credibility in this community. This elderly civilian was openly ignoring a direct order from a commissioned officer of the United States Navy. It was disrespectful. It was insubordinate. It was completely, utterly unacceptable. It undermined everything she'd worked to build, every standard she'd fought to maintain, every bit of credibility she'd scraped together in a community that didn't automatically grant it to people like her, that made women prove themselves twice as hard for half the recognition. She reached down and grabbed the soup bowl, pulled it away with more force than necessary, more anger than the situation warranted. Liquid sloshed over the rim, spattering the table surface, forming small pools that caught the afternoon light. I said now. The old man looked at the empty space where his soup had been, stared at it for a long moment as if trying to understand how something present could suddenly be gone, how the simple act of eating lunch could be interrupted by force, how authority could manifest as a confiscated bowl. Then he looked up at Bryn. His eyes, that winter sky blue-gray, held something now. Not anger, not fear, something else entirely. Something that made Bryn's absolute certainty waver for just a heartbeat, made her wonder if maybe she'd miscalculated, made a mistake, crossed a line she didn't fully understand. Something ancient and dangerous and utterly calm like the ocean before a hurricane. "Young lady," the old man said, his voice still quiet but carrying an edge like a blade drawn from a sheath, like steel scraping stone, "you should put that back." "I'll what?" Bryn heard herself say, her voice sharper than intended. "File a complaint. Call your congressman. Write a letter." She set the bowl down on the next table, hard enough to make it ring against the surface, hard enough that more soup sloshed out. "Sir, you are trespassing in a restricted military facility. You are refusing lawful orders from a superior officer. I could have the master-at-arms arrest you right now for unauthorized access. I could have you detained. I could have you barred from this base permanently." "You could," the old man agreed, his tone unchanged, no challenge in his voice. Just acknowledgement of fact, of possibility, of the authority she wielded. "That's within your power. Then stand up, last chance. Come with me to security. We'll sort this out and you can go home to your family." The old man stood slowly. His movements were stiff, painful. The movements of someone whose body had been broken and repaired so many times, nothing worked quite right anymore. Joints that had been shattered, bones that had healed crooked, muscles that had been torn and scarred over. He rose like a man climbing out of a grave, fighting gravity and time and accumulated damage with every inch gained. He was shorter than Bryn expected, maybe 5'9", with the stoop of age, with the compression of decades bearing down on his spine. Thin to the point of frail, his frame barely filling out the faded windbreaker. The kind of elderly man you'd see at a grocery store, moving carefully through aisles, representing no threat to anyone, easily overlooked, easily dismissed. Except his eyes. Those winter storm eyes held something that didn't match the frail body, something that whispered of danger, of capability long dormant but not forgotten, of violence restrained but not eliminated, like a weapon rusting in a museum, old worn but still deadly if you knew how to use it. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Bryn demanded, her voice carrying across the now silent facility. The dining room had gone completely silent now. Absolutely silent. 30 operators watched, waited, held their collective breath. Some leaned forward slightly, bodies tensed, as if preparing for something, as if they sensed what was coming before Bryn did. The old man seemed to be weighing something, making a decision, calculating odds, measuring the moment against some internal standard Bryn couldn't see. Then in that rough whisper, barely audible but somehow carrying to every corner of the room, cutting through silence like a knife, "They used to call me Redeemer." The silence that followed was absolute, complete. The kind of silence that comes before explosions, before worlds change, before everything you thought you knew becomes obsolete. One of the SEALs at a nearby table, a master chief with 26 years of service, 4 combat deployments, a chest full of medals that told stories he'd never share, and a face that had seen too much and remembered all of it, went white as a sheet, actually pale, color draining from his face like someone had opened a valve. His fork clattered to his plate, with a sound like a gunshot in the silence, like a hammer striking an anvil, impossibly loud. Bryn didn't understand. The word meant nothing to her. Redeemer. What kind of call sign was that? What did it signify? Why did it matter? "Sir, I don't have time for captain." The Master Chief stood so fast his chair fell backward, hitting the floor with a crash that made everyone jump. His voice was urgent, almost panicked, actually shaking. "Captain Callahan, ma'am, you need to step back. Right now, immediately." Bryn turned to him, confused by the sudden intervention, by the fear she saw in the veteran's eyes, by the way his hands had come up in a placating gesture. "Master Chief Wade, this man is—" "That's Declan Thorne." Wade's voice was shaking, actually trembling. A man who'd survived firefights and ambushes and operations that would never be declassified, shaking like a recruit at boot camp. His call sign was Redeemer. He's a legend. From operations that don't exist in any official record, from missions still classified 3 decades later, from wars we're not supposed to talk about. Bryn looked at the old man again, saw the same frail figure, the trembling hands, the discount store clothes, the weathered face. Nothing had changed physically, but somehow everything had changed. This man is 82 years old. She said, her voice weaker, now less certain. He can barely hold a spoon steady. He's exactly who he says he is. A new voice from the entrance, a voice carrying absolute authority, the kind that came from decades of command, from having the power to order fleets and decide fates and shape the future of American military power. Every head turned as one, like a choreographed movement. Standing in the doorway was Admiral Cormac Blackwell. 4 stars gleaming on each shoulder board under the fluorescent lights, catching the sun streaming through windows, reflecting authority that couldn't be questioned. The Chief of Naval Operations, the highest-ranking officer in the United States Navy, the man who commanded over 330,000 active-duty sailors, who advised the president, who shaped naval policy for the greatest maritime force in human history. He was flanked by 2 aides in crisp uniforms and a civilian wearing a Pentagon security badge, indicating access to the highest classification levels, the kind of clearance that let you read documents that could reshape history if they ever became public. The entire dining facility came to attention in one fluid motion. Chairs scraped, bodies snapped rigid, heels clicked together, hands came to salute position. The sound of 30 SEALs standing as one, moving with the precision that came from years of training and discipline and muscle memory. Blackwell walked into the facility with measured steps, each footfall. Deliberate, his eyes locked on the old man, on Declan Thorne, on Redeemer. His expression showed absolute respect mixed with something else. Relief, perhaps, or vindication, or the satisfaction of a debt finally being paid. Declan Blackwell said, his voice carrying reverence that couldn't be faked, couldn't be manufactured, could only come from genuine respect earned through blood and sacrifice. I apologize for being late. I was told you'd be here at 1300. Should have known you'd arrive early. A pause waited with meaning. You always did. The old man Redeemer nodded slightly, a minimal movement of his head. Cormac, you didn't need to come personally. A phone call would have been sufficient. An email, a text message, anything but this. Yes, I did need to come. Blackwell walked past Bryn without acknowledging her, without even glancing in her direction, as if she'd ceased to exist in any meaningful way. He stopped directly before Thorne, close enough to speak quietly, but choosing to speak clearly, choosing to let everyone hear. You've refused every invitation for 40 years. Refused every ceremony, every medal presentation, every attempt to honor your service, every recognition we've tried to give you. He paused, and Bryn saw something in the Admiral's face she'd never seen before. Something like determination mixed with sadness, mixed with the weight of decades of trying. But this one, Declan, this one, the president himself signed the order. Presidential authority. No more refusing, no more hiding. You're getting the recognition you have earned, whether you want it or not, whether you like it or not, whether it makes you uncomfortable or not. Bryn stood frozen still, holding the confiscated soup bowl like an idiot, like evidence at a crime scene, like the physical manifestation of her catastrophic mistake, feeling the world tilt beneath her feet, feeling everything she thought she knew dissolve like sugar in water. Blackwell finally turned to look at her, really look at her. His eyes were ice cold enough to freeze blood. And in that gaze, Bryn saw her career hanging by a thread thinner than spider silk, saw 15 years of service potentially ending in this moment, saw the future she'd built crumbling like sandcastles at high tide. Captain Callahan, his voice was frozen steel. Why are you holding Mr. Thorne's lunch? Sir, Words failed. How did you explain? How did you justify? I didn't know who he was. He didn't have proper authorization to Bartram. He has authorization that supersedes yours. Blackwell cut her off with the precision of a scalpel. Mine. Everyone in this building. Everyone on this base. Most people in the entire Department of Defense. He gestured to an aide who stepped forward with a leather folder stamped with classification markings so heavy they practically hummed with secrecy, with the weight of national security implications. Declan Thorne, Blackwell said, his voice formal, now reading from official record, from documents that had been sealed for decades. Retired Chief Warrant Officer, United States Navy, SEAL Team 2, 1965 to 1995. 30 years of continuous service in naval special warfare. He paused, letting that sink in, letting everyone absorb what 30 years meant. 3 decades of war and peace and everything in between. Call sign Redeemer. Blackwell opened the folder with reverent care like handling scripture. His hands were steady, but his voice carried barely contained emotion, the kind that came from reading about heroes you'd never expected to meet, men you thought were myths until they stood before you in fated windbreakers. Operational record classified at highest levels for national security reasons. He began reading from documents Bryn could see were heavily redacted, black bars covering entire paragraphs, whole sections missing, removed, sealed, perhaps forever. Confirmed missions: 47 deep reconnaissance operations, Desert Storm, Somalia, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, operations across 6 continents, missions that officially never happened, actions that shaped history in ways the public will never know. Another pause, longer this time, heavier. Confirmed enemy kills classified for operational security, but conservatively estimated based on after-action reports and witness testimony at over 150 hostile combatants eliminated in defense of American lives and interests. Bryn felt the air leave her lungs. 150, 150, more men than populated small villages. An entire company worth of enemy soldiers eliminated by one man over 3 decades. Confirmed rescues of downed pilots and isolated personnel, 23 successful extractions from behind enemy lines. 23 times he penetrated hostile territory. 23 times he brought Americans home when command had written them off, when the official stance was presumed KIA and not worth the risk. Blackwell's voice thickened with emotion now, with the weight of what these words meant. Awards and decorations. He read slowly, giving weight to each syllable, each word, each honor. 3 Navy Crosses. Our nation's second highest honor for valor in combat, awarded for extraordinary heroism under fire. 8 Silver Stars for gallantry in action. 10 Bronze Stars with Valor Device for heroic achievement. 6 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat, and that's only the wounds serious enough to require medical evacuation. The minor ones, the ones he fought through, aren't counted. He looked up from the folder. Looked directly at Thorne, who stood quietly, expression unchanged, as if Blackwell was reading someone else's record, talking about someone else's life. And a Medal of Honor that was classified for 15 years because the mission it was awarded for was too sensitive to acknowledge. Because admitting what Declan Thorne did would have required admitting where we sent him, what we asked him to do, how many international laws we bent or broke in the process, how many boundaries we crossed in the name of bringing Americans home. The dining facility was absolutely silent now. 30 operators, men who had seen combat themselves, who had faced enemy fire, who understood what those awards meant in blood and bone and sleepless nights, stood in stunned silence. Some had tears in their eyes. Some stood at rigid attention. Some just stared, processing, understanding, recognizing. Bryn felt like she was drowning in air, like the oxygen had turned to water, and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was hearing. Mr. Thorne's call sign wasn't given by his teammates. Blackwell continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, now the edge of someone who needed the world to understand something important. It was given by the enemy. They put a bounty on his head. $50,000 American during Somalia, more money than most Somali warlords saw in a lifetime. $100,000 during the Iraq insurgency. By the time he retired from contract work, the bounty had reached $150,000, more than any other operator in modern special operations history, more than commanders, more than generals, more than anyone. He paused, letting that land, letting the weight of it settle. They called him the Redeemer in their radio communications. We collected the intercepts. We have the translations. We heard them warn each other because he had a reputation for never leaving a man behind. Ever. For always returning to failed missions. For redeeming the fallen when command had written them off as lost, as acceptable casualties as the cost of doing business. Blackwell looked at Thorne, who stood silently, that weathered face showing nothing. They warned each other about him in radio traffic. They feared him. Not just because of how many he killed, though that number is considerable, but because of his promise. Because when a SEAL team was ambushed and men were listed as MIA, when helicopters went down and crews were surrounded, when missions failed and operators were captured or killed, Declan Thorne went back. Alone, he penetrated enemy lines, located bodies, retrieved fallen brothers under sustained fire, brought them home. The Admiral's voice dropped lower, more intimate, more personal. He did this despite direct orders to stand down, despite being told the men were dead and the risk wasn't justified. Despite commands saying no, saying it's too dangerous, saying we can't authorize it, he went anyway. Because he'd made a promise. Because some things matter more than orders. Because bringing brothers home dead or alive was the only mission that really mattered. Bryn couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The bowl was still in her hands, soup growing cold, a physical reminder of her arrogance, her assumption, her complete and catastrophic failure of judgment. Blackwell turned back to her. His eyes were hard as diamonds, cold as deep space. This man is a living legend. The operations he ran shaped modern special operations doctrine. The tactics he pioneered are still taught at BUD/S training to every SEAL candidate. His after-action reports have been studied by every NATO Special Operations Force, by Israeli commandos, by British SAS. He's influenced 3 generations of warriors. A pause that felt like eternity, like standing before judgment. And you just confiscated his soup and treated him like a vagrant, like someone who didn't belong, like someone who hadn't earned the right to sit in this room, to eat in this facility, to exist in this space. Bryn felt tears threatening, felt her face burning with shame, so intense it was physically painful, like acid on skin. Sir, I apologize. I'm sorry. I didn't know. His ID showed a code I didn't recognize. I should have asked, should have checked, should have... His ID is classified at a level you don't have clearance to fully understand. Blackwell interrupted, his voice unforgiving. The access code requires special authorization just to read properly. It's compartmented because, even now, 30 years after some of these operations, acknowledging what Declan Thorne did could still compromise national security, could still expose operations that remain classified, could still endanger people who worked with him, who are still alive, still in sensitive positions, still serving. Blackwell moved closer to Thorne. His voice softened, the ice thawing slightly. Declan, I apologize. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. This wasn't the welcome you deserved. This wasn't the respect you've earned 10,000 times over. Thorne shrugged slightly, a minimal movement of his shoulders beneath the faded windbreaker. It's fine, Cormac. The young captain was doing her job. Security matters. She saw something that didn't look right, an old man in a restricted space, and she acted. Enforced regulations. Protected the facility. That's exactly what she's supposed to do. That's what we train officers to do. It's not fine, Blackwell said firmly, with command authority. You deserve respect. You've earned it through 3 decades of blood and sacrifice. You've earned it by bringing home men who would have been lost. You've earned it by being the standard every operator aspires to. He gestured to his aide, who moved with practiced efficiency. Get Mr. Thorne fresh soup. Hot soup. The good stuff from the officer's mess, not standard galley fare. And inform the ceremony coordinator will be delayed 30 minutes. I'm not starting until Mr. Thorne has finished his lunch. Properly. Quietly. With the dignity and respect he deserves and has always deserved. Blackwell pulled out a chair at Thorne's table with careful deliberation. Sat down, the Chief of Naval Operations. 4-star Admiral, the highest-ranking officer in the Navy, commanding more firepower than most nations possessed. Sitting down to have lunch with an 82-year-old man in a faded windbreaker and worn jeans and scuffed sneakers. 2 warriors, 2 generations, 2 men who understood what it meant to serve. One of the young SEALs, maybe 25, with the fresh-faced intensity of recent BUD/S graduation, with muscles still bulging and confidence still intact, approached the table reverently, almost fearfully, carrying fresh soup like it was a sacred offering, like he was approaching an altar. He set it down before Thorne with hands that trembled visibly. Not from weakness, from awe, from understanding that he was in the presence of something rare. Sir, the young SEAL said quietly, his voice thick with emotion he didn't try to hide. Thank you for your service, for everything you did, for all the lives you saved, for all the brothers you brought home. He paused, struggling with words, searching for something adequate to express what he felt. My grandfather served in the Gulf War, Marine Force Recon. He told me stories about a SEAL they called Redeemer, stories about impossible rescues and solo missions, and a man who never quit. I thought you were a myth, a legend we told ourselves to feel brave, like Beowulf or Achilles, not real, not possible. Thorne looked at the young man with those winter storm eyes, and something in his expression softened, gentled. I'm real, son, he said, his rough voice carrying warmth now. Just old, just worn out, just past my expiration date, but real. Flesh and blood and bad knees and too many scars. He picked up his spoon with those trembling hands, those hands that had killed over 100 men and saved 23 Americans. Thank you for your service. Stay safe out there. Watch your six. Trust your training. Trust your brothers. And most importantly, a pause waited with meaning. Bring your brothers home, no matter what. Dead or alive, they come home. That's the only promise that matters. That's the only mission that counts. Everything else is just details. Yes, sir, the young SEAL said, his voice breaking slightly. I will, sir. I promise. He stepped back, returned to his table, sat down heavily like someone who'd just met God and wasn't sure how to process the experience. Bryn still stood there, frozen in place like a statue, like someone had cast her in bronze. The confiscated soup bowl still in her hands, growing cold, a physical reminder of her catastrophic mistake, of her arrogance, of her assumption that age and appearance told the whole story, of her complete failure of judgment and humility. Wade, the Master Chief, who'd tried to warn her, who'd recognized the name when she hadn't, approached slowly, stood at attention out of respect, though technically they were the same pay grade. Ma'am, he said quietly for her ears, only his voice gentle in a way that made her want to cry. You couldn't have known. The Admiral's right, you were doing your job, protecting the facility, enforcing security. That's exactly what good officers do. I humiliated him, Bryn whispered, her voice barely audible, cracking with shame. In front of everyone, in front of his brothers. I took his soup and treated him like he was nothing. No, ma'am. Wade's voice was gentle but firm, carrying hard truth wrapped in kindness. You humiliated yourself. There's a difference, one you can learn from, one that can make you better if you let it. He glanced at Thorne, who was eating his soup quietly, while Blackwell sat across from him, the two old warriors sharing a moment of peace in the chaos of modern military life. That man right there, Wade said softly with reverence. He's why most of us join. Why we push through Hell Week when every part of our body is screaming to quit. Why we take the oath seriously. Why we believe in something bigger than ourselves. Wade looked back at Bryn, and his eyes held understanding, not judgment. You just got the most valuable lesson of your career, Captain. The kind of lesson they can't teach at the academy. The kind that only comes from making mistakes in front of people who matter. Don't waste it. Don't let pride make it meaningless. Learn. Grow. Become better. He walked away, leaving Bryn standing alone in the middle of the dining facility, holding a bowl of cold soup, watching a legend eat lunch. And for the first time in 15 years of service, for the first time since she'd raised her right hand and sworn an oath to support and defend, she understood absolutely nothing about the world she thought she knew. Everything had changed. Everything. Blackwell sat across from Thorne, steam rising from the fresh bowl of soup between them, like incense in a temple. The Admiral's 4 stars caught the afternoon light streaming through windows, but in this moment they meant nothing, just metal, just decoration, 2 old warriors sharing a meal, 2 men who'd seen the world burn and kept fighting anyway. That was all that mattered. In 30 minutes, Blackwell said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent dining facility without needing amplification. We're holding a ceremony in the auditorium. 300 personnel will attend. Officers, operators, support staff, people who need to understand what real service looks like. He paused, looking around the room at the young faces watching, absorbing, learning. The president authorized declassification of certain aspects of Mr. Thorne's service record. Not all of it. Some operations will remain sealed for decades more, maybe forever. But enough. Enough so the special operations community can finally understand who he was, what he did, why it mattered, why he earned the call sign Redeemer. Bryn stood frozen at the edge of the room, the cold soup bowl finally set down on a nearby table, her hands empty but still feeling the weight of it. Every eye in the room had been on Blackwell and Thorne, but now some shifted to her, judging, questioning, wondering why she was still here, why she hadn't fled, why she was subjecting herself to this public lesson. Declan is being awarded the Navy Cross today, Blackwell continued, his voice steady but emotional. Not his 4th one, but a public presentation of all 3 that were classified for decades. Awards given in secret ceremonies in classified facilities, witnessed by people who couldn't talk about what they'd seen. He paused, and the weight of those words settled over the room like snow. He's being awarded the Defense Superior Service Medal for his work training the next generation. For 10 years of voluntary service as a BUD/S instructor when he could have retired to a quiet life. For making every SEAL since 2005 better than they would have been without him. Another pause, heavier now. And most importantly, he's being publicly presented with the Medal of Honor he received in secret in 2009. The nation's highest military decoration, an honor fewer than 3,500 Americans have received since the Civil War. An award that was classified for 15 years because the mission was too sensitive, too controversial, too revealing of where we operated and how we fought. The words hung in the air like smoke, like ghosts, like truths too heavy to carry easily. Medal of Honor. The words everyone recognized, the honor everyone understood. The decoration that meant you'd face death in chosen duty, chosen brothers, chosen something bigger than survival. But before we honor those medals, Blackwell said, his eyes sweeping the room, making contact with young operators who leaned forward to hear better. I want you to understand what they represent. Not statistics, not abstractions, not numbers in a file somewhere. He gestured at the folder before him at the classified documents that told a story most would never read. Real moments, real choices, real costs measured in blood and bone and futures sacrificed. Bryn finally moved her body, unlocking from paralysis. She walked to the edge of the room, away from the center, trying to be invisible. But Wade, the Master Chief, who tried to warn her, caught her eye, gestured to an empty chair at a nearby table. An invitation, or maybe a command disguised as courtesy. She sat her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, preparing to receive the education she'd been too arrogant to seek. 6 stories, Blackwell said, and his voice took on the cadence of a storyteller, of someone who understood that history was more than dates and facts. 6 missions that made Declan Thorne a legend, that earned him the call sign Redeemer, that changed how we fight and how we think about never leaving brothers behind. He opened the folder to the first page, to the first story. Story 1, The Fundamentals. January 1991, Kuwait, Operation Desert Storm, the ground war to liberate Kuwait from Iraqi occupation. Blackwell's voice painted the picture with words chosen for impact, for emotional resonance, for truth that cut through decades. Chief Petty Officer Declan Thorne, age 48, SEAL Team 2 attached to Marine reconnaissance units as a sniper element. His mission: provide overwatch for a Marine rifle platoon clearing Iraqi defensive bunkers along the Saudi-Kuwaiti border. Bryn could visualize it now, her intelligence training kicking in. The desert, the heat shimmer turning the world liquid, the endless sand that got into everything that abraded skin and equipment in patience. Thorne was a sniper, one of the best in naval special warfare. Had a reputation for shots that shouldn't be possible, for eliminating threats at ranges that exceeded equipment specifications. But on this day, his scope failed. Blackwell looked up from the page, making sure everyone understood the significance. High-tech optic, latest military technology fresh from the manufacturer, thermal imaging, ballistic calculation, range finding, computer-assisted targeting, supposed to make everything easier, supposed to give shooters superhuman capability. He paused for effect. It failed at the worst possible moment. Electronics cooked in the desert heat, circuits fried, screen went dark. All that technology became useless weight. The Marine platoon, 23 men, most in their early 20s, on their first combat operation, walked into an ambush. Iraqi troops dug in, camouflaged, waiting, with the patience of men defending their homeland. Machine gun positions, RPG teams, mortars pre-sighted on kill zones. Blackwell's voice intensified, pulling the audience into the moment. The Marines were pinned down in a wadi, taking fire from 800 yards. Their radio operator was hit in the first 30 seconds, shoulder shattered, radio destroyed. They couldn't call for air support, couldn't request artillery, couldn't retreat without taking casualties. Thorne continued eating his soup, his expression unchanged, as if Blackwell was reading someone else's story, talking about events that happened to someone else in some other life. Thorne had one option: iron sights, the backup system every operator trains with but hopes never to use. Because at 800 yards with iron sights, you're not calculating windage and bullet drop with a computer. You're feeling it, reading wind from the way sand moves, judging distance by experience, trusting fundamentals learned through 10,000 repetitions. Blackwell's voice dropped, became more intimate. Thorne took the first shot. One Iraqi gunner eliminated, then another shot, another kill, then 5 more in rapid succession. 7 Iraqi soldiers, 7 confirmed kills, each shot over 800 yards, with iron sights, in desert wind that shifted every few seconds, under return fire that kicked up sand around his position. A pause to let that sink in, to let people understand what 800 yards meant, what iron sights meant, what doing it 7 times under fire meant. The platoon extracted under cover of his fire. All 23 Marines survived, because a 48-year-old SEAL remembered his fundamentals when his technology failed, because he'd trained so hard on the basics that advanced systems became optional instead of essential. Bryn felt something shift in her chest, felt the memory of this morning's briefing take on new meaning. Hendricks had mocked her reliance on AI analysis, on computer models, on data processed by algorithms, on technology doing the thinking. She'd built her entire career on being smarter than the operators who didn't understand intelligence work, on proving that analysis and information and processed data could save lives without anyone ever firing a shot, on demonstrating that the future of warfare was digital, not physical. But Thorne had saved 23 lives because he knew how to fight when the technology died, because he'd mastered fundamentals so thoroughly that losing his scope was an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. Blackwell looked directly at Bryn, now his gaze heavy with meaning. What this teaches us is that technology serves the warrior, never the other way around. Master the fundamentals first. Win reading range estimation, breath control, trigger discipline. Master them so completely they become instinct. Then add technology as a force multiplier. But never ever let technology replace fundamentals, because technology fails. Batteries die, circuits fry, software crashes, but fundamentals never fail. Story 1. Truth 1. Bryn felt like she was back at the Naval Academy taking notes in a classroom, learning something she should have understood years ago. Patience under fire. Story 2, Blackwell said, turning the page in his folder. October 1993, Mogadishu, Somalia, the day after the Battle of Mogadishu. The room grew quieter, if that was even possible. Everyone knew what came next. Black Hawk Down, the battle that became legend and nightmare. 18 Americans killed, 73 wounded. Bodies dragged through streets, images that haunted a generation. The day after the main battle, Blackwell continued, his voice heavier now. 4 Americans were still missing. Crew from a second helicopter shot down during the chaos. Listed as MIA, presumed KIA, command made the assessment that the risk of recovery wasn't justified. 4 bodies, if they were even recoverable, weren't worth risking more American lives. Thorne set down his spoon, for the first time a subtle movement, but one that drew every eye. Chief Petty Officer Thorne, age 50, disagreed with that assessment, strongly. He volunteered for solo extraction, argued that we don't leave brothers behind, that presumed KIA isn't good enough, that families deserve closure, even if it costs everything. Blackwell's voice tightened with emotion. He penetrated Mogadishu alone, through enemy-controlled territory, through streets where every window could hide a shooter, through a city that wanted Americans dead. Found the crash site in a neighborhood controlled by the same militia that had killed the 18 Americans the day before. And he found 4 survivors. Not bodies, survivors. 2 pilots, 2 crew chiefs, injured, badly broken bones, gunshot wounds, severe dehydration, surrounded by militia forces. No way to extract them without air support, and no air support was coming because command had already written them off. Bryn leaned forward, unable to help herself, drawn into the story despite everything. So, Thorne held position for 27 hours. Blackwell let that number hang in the air. 27 hours, lone, surrounded by hundreds of hostile fighters, in one of the most dangerous cities on Earth, with limited ammunition, limited water, limited everything except determination. He was shot 3 times during those 27 hours, once in the thigh through and through, non-vital, once in the left shoulder, bullet lodged against the scapula, still there today because removing it would cause more damage, once grazed across his ribs, taking skin but missing organs by millimeters. Blackwell paused, and when he continued, his voice was thick with emotion. He broke 2 ribs when a building collapsed during artillery fire from a Somali technical. But he held that position, killed an estimated 40 enemy combatants over those 27 hours. Radioed coordinates every 2 hours, gave updates on the survivors' conditions, waited for anyone to authorize extraction. To say, yes, they're worth saving, yes, we'll send help, yes, American lives matter. When the rescue helicopters finally came, when command finally authorized the operation, after 27 hours of Thorne holding alone, all 4 men were still alive. Weak, barely conscious, but alive. Blackwell looked up from his notes. Thorne was the last one on board. He carried 2 of the survivors to the helicopter himself because they couldn't walk, refused medical attention until everyone else was secured, passed out from blood loss 30 seconds after the bird lifted off. The Admiral's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The Somali warlords started calling him the Redeemer in their radio traffic after that. We collected the intercepts through signals intelligence, heard them warn each other. Avoid Redeemer's territory. The Redeemer is coming. Pull back, Redeemer is active. Our intelligence officers picked it up, translated it, reported it up the chain. The name stuck, because that's what he did. He redeemed the lost. brought back the ones command had abandoned, proved that no American was expendable, that every life mattered, that the promise of leave no man behind wasn't just words. Bryn felt her throat tighten, felt something breaking inside her chest. This morning, she'd walked away from her junior analyst when Hendricks started attacking. Abandoned the young officer rather than defending her work, defending her team, standing with someone who needed her. Chose her own comfort over loyalty. Let someone drown rather than risk getting wet herself. And the moment crystallized with painful clarity, she saw herself in that briefing room, saw her own cowardice, saw how quickly she'd prioritized self-preservation over supporting her people. Thorne had stayed for 27 hours under sustained fire for 4 men he barely knew, had taken 3 bullets and broken ribs and kept fighting because that's what the promise meant. Because brothers don't leave brothers even when staying means dying. She couldn't stay in a briefing room for 4 minutes to defend her analyst. The comparison was devastating, crushing, the kind of truth that changed how you saw yourself forever. Blackwell was still talking, but Bryn barely heard him, lost in the realization of her own failure, her own weakness, her own inability to live up to the standards this old man had set decades ago. What we learned from this, Blackwell said, and Bryn forced herself to focus to listen, is that patience is a weapon, that waiting is sometimes the hardest action you can take, that the cost of saving lives is measured in hours of agony and fear and bleeding, and you pay it anyway. You pay it because the alternative, leaving brothers behind, is unacceptable, unthinkable, impossible. Story 2, Truth 2, The Cost of Sacrifice. Story 3, March 2003, Fallujah, Iraq. The first Battle of Fallujah before the city became synonymous with urban warfare and American sacrifice. Blackwell's voice changed, became heavier, darker. This story hurt more than the others. You could hear it in his tone. Chief Warrant Officer Thorne, age 60, technically retired from active SEAL teams, working as a civilian contractor for special operations support. His official role advisory only, training and tactical consultation, no direct combat missions. A bitter laugh from somewhere in the room. Everyone knew how that worked. Advisory meant whatever the mission required. Contractors did everything active duty did, just with different paperwork. A SEAL team was ambushed during a night raid on a suspected insurgent safe house. The intelligence was bad, happened sometimes despite everyone's best efforts. Instead of 5 fighters, there were 20. Instead of light arms, they had machine guns and RPGs. Blackwell's hands tightened on the folder. One operator was killed instantly in the opening seconds of the ambush. Lance Corporal Matthew Hendricks, 23 years old. First deployment, 3 months in country, engaged to his high school sweetheart back in Tennessee, hit by machine gun fire before he could return a shot. The name hung in the air, Hendricks. Bryn wondered if there was any relation to Commander Hendricks, the man who'd eviscerated her work this morning. The world of special operations was small. Names repeated, legacies passed down. The team had to fall back, standard protocol, retrieve the body later when tactical conditions permit, when the risk is manageable. They extracted under fire, left Hendricks behind because staying meant losing more men. Thorne's hands had stopped trembling. They were absolutely still now, wrapped around the soup bowl with a grip that whitened his knuckles. Thorne waited 3 days. Let the situation cool down. Let the insurgents think the Americans weren't coming back. Let their guard drop. Blackwell stopped reading, looked directly at Thorne. Then you went back alone, penetrated the city at night, found the body where they'd left it, in that burned-out building. The insurgents had booby-trapped it. IED beneath the corporal's vest, pressure activated, waiting for the recovery team. Enough explosives to kill everyone in a 10-meter radius. His voice cracked slightly. You cleared that IED yourself, alone under sporadic fire from insurgents who'd spotted you. Then carried Lance Corporal Hendricks out. 6 miles through hostile territory. Took 2 rounds to your left knee, one shattered the patella, one tore through the joint capsule. They told you you'd never walk again without a cane. Told you your career was over. Told you the damage was permanent. Blackwell paused. You carried that body 6 miles on a destroyed knee. Crawled the last 2 when the leg finally gave out completely. Refused morphine because you needed to stay alert. Got him to the extraction point. Handed him over to the recovery team. Then Thorne spoke, his voice rough but clear, cutting through the silence. His mother deserved to bury her son. 5 words. That was all. No elaboration. No justification. No explanation beyond that simple truth. His mother deserved to bury her son. Blackwell nodded slowly, understanding, passing between 2 men who'd both lost people, Both made impossible choices. Both carried weights no one else could see. From that day forward, the Admiral said quietly, Declan made a promise. No one gets left behind. Ever. Dead or alive, they come home. That's when the call sign Redeemer became more than a name. It became a guarantee, a covenant, a sacred promise that every operator who worked with him understood. Bryn felt tears burning behind her eyes, hot and shameful. 2 years ago, she'd lost a junior intelligence officer. Petty Officer Sarah Chen. Not to combat, to suicide. The young woman had been struggling PTSD from her deployment depression. She'd hidden pain she'd carried alone. Bryn had been too busy with her own career advancement to notice. Too focused on the next promotion, the next assignment, the next rung on the ladder. She'd seen the signs, the missed meetings, the declining performance, the withdrawal from social activities. But she'd categorized it as a performance problem, not a cry for help. Had documented it for Chen's record instead of addressing it as a human being in crisis. Chen had killed herself on a Tuesday night. Bryn had found out Wednesday morning via email, official notification, impersonal, clinical. She'd never processed it, never forgiven herself, never learned from it, just buried it under work and ambition and the relentless forward motion of a career that demanded everything and gave nothing back. Thorne had destroyed his knee, ended his ability to walk without pain, sacrificed his physical capability, forever retrieving a fallen soldier because a mother deserved closure. Bryn hadn't even visited Chen's family, hadn't gone to the funeral, hadn't done anything except sign paperwork and move on. The comparison was unbearable. What this reveals, Blackwell said softly, is that leadership has a cost, real cost, measured in bone and blood and futures you sacrifice, measured in knees that never heal and pain that never stops and capabilities you lose forever. And you pay it anyway. You pay it because some things matter more than walking without pain. Because bringing brothers home, giving families closure, honoring the fallen, keeping promises is worth any price. Story 3, Truth 3. Bryn understood now why Wade had said this was the most valuable lesson of her career. Why standing here absorbing this education was more important than fleeing in shame. Teaching the next generation. Story 4, Blackwell said, and his voice lightened slightly like emerging from dark water into sunlight. 2005 through 2015. BUD/S training facility right here in Coronado. 10 years of teaching, 10 years of making every SEAL better. Thorne almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth twitched upward for just a second before settling back into that weathered neutrality. Chief Warrant Officer Thorne, aged 62 to 72, officially retired from all military service, receiving disability payments for the shattered knee, for the bullets still lodged in his body, for the accumulated damage of 3 decades in harm's way. Could have spent those years fishing, golfing, enjoying the retirement he'd earned 10 times over. Blackwell's smile was sharp, knowing. Instead, he volunteered as a BUD/S instructor, specifically requested Hell Week duty, the Crucible. 5.5 days of constant physical training, 4 hours of total sleep across the entire week. The evolution that breaks 60% of candidates. The filter that separates those who want it from those who need it. Murmurs rippled through the room. Hell Week, every SEAL's defining memory. The week that proved you could do impossible things, that your body could go further than your mind believed, that quitting was a choice you didn't have to make. The young candidates, 22, 23 years old, physically perfect, full of confidence. They saw this old man with a limp, white hair, age spots, hands that shook when he wasn't concentrating. They mocked him, called him grandpa, asked why he wasn't home watching TV and collecting Social Security. Blackwell's smile grew sharper. Then training started, and the 70-year-old man with the destroyed knee outswam them, outlasted them in the cold water that makes strong men cry, held plank position longer than candidates 40 years younger, ran further, pushed harder, never quit, never slowed, never gave them the satisfaction of seeing him break. One of the young SEALs in the room laughed, not mockery, but recognition, the laugh of someone who'd lived it. I had him, the SEAL said, his voice carrying clearly. 2014. I was 23, he was 71. Me and my boat crew, we talked shit about the old man who couldn't hold a rifle steady. Said he was too old to teach us anything. Said he didn't understand modern warfare. The young operator's voice grew quiet, respectful. Second day of Hell Week, we're doing log PT, 220 pounds of telephone poles, 6 man-hours of overhead presses and squats and runs. We're dying, shaking, ready to quit. He paused. Thorne stood next to us, held a plank position for 45 minutes while we did our log evolution. Never shook, never wavered, just held it staring at us, demonstrating what real strength looked like. When we finished, he stood up, no tremor, no strain, and said, "Mastery compounds, gentlemen. Every rep matters. I've done 10 million more than you. That's not age. That's accumulated capability." The SEAL looked at Thorne with something like reverence. Changed how I thought about training, about experience, about what veterans have to teach us. I'm a better operator because that old man refused to let me be comfortable in my ignorance. Blackwell nodded, vindicated. 147 students graduated BUD/S under Thorne's instruction. 147 SEALs currently in active service learned from him. That age is just accumulated expertise. That experience isn't weakness, it's compressed time. That fundamentals taught by someone who's lived them for decades are worth more than any new technique or tactical fad. He looked around the room. How many of you trained under Chief Thorne? Raise your hands. 11 hands went up. 11 operators ranging from their 20s to their 40s scattered across the dining facility. 11 men who'd been shaped by this legend. "Keep them up," Blackwell said. Then to the room, "These men are statistically better operators than their peers. Lower injury rates, higher mission success rates, better leadership scores. We've studied it. The data is clear. Thorne-trained SEALs perform better across every metric we measure." He paused for effect. Because he didn't just teach tactics. He taught mindset. He taught that mastery comes from repetition, from doing the basics 10,000 times until they become instinct. He taught that new isn't always better, that sometimes the old ways work precisely because they've been tested for decades. He taught humility and patience, and the understanding that you never stop learning, never stop improving, never stop becoming better. Bryn thought about her dismissal of the veteran intelligence analysts, the older officers with decades of experience who she'd written off as outdated, as relics of a previous era, as obstacles to modernization and progress. How many lessons had she missed because she assumed youth meant innovation and age meant obsolescence? How much wisdom had she rejected because it came from people who didn't speak the language of AI and algorithms and digital warfare? How much had her arrogance cost her team, cost her missions, cost her own development as an officer and a leader? The truth here, Blackwell said, varying his phrasing, avoiding the repetitive structure, is that teaching is how legends become immortal. That passing knowledge matters more than personal glory. That legacy is measured not in your own achievements, however extraordinary, but in how many others you help succeed, in how many people you make better, in how far your influence extends beyond your own hands. Story 4, Truth. 4, The Impossible Mission. Story 5, April 2009, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. The mission that earned the Medal of Honor. Blackwell's voice grew grave again, heavy with the weight of what came next. The room held its collective breath. Medal of Honor. The words everyone recognized. The decoration that meant you'd faced death and chosen something more important than survival. Chief Warrant Officer Thorne, age 66, working as a CIA contractor. His official role, advisory and training for Afghan commando units, teaching them SEAL tactics, helping them become self-sufficient, preparing them to fight without American support. Blackwell looked at Thorne and something passed between them. Understanding, respect, the knowledge of what really happened. Not supposed to be anywhere near combat operations. His contract specifically prohibited direct action missions. He was a teacher, a consultant, a strategic advisor. Supposed to stay in the Tactical Operations Center, providing guidance over radio, staying safe while younger men did the dangerous work. That phrase again, supposed to stay safe. But warriors like Thorne didn't get to stay safe. Didn't want to. A CIA safe house was overrun. 9 personnel trapped inside. 6 operators, 4 SEALs, 2 Delta Force. 3 intelligence officers, analysts, who'd been in country for months, who spoke the language, who understood the culture. Taliban forces estimated at 60 fighters surrounding the compound. Heavy weapons, prepared assault. They had time to plan it, time to bring in reinforcements, time to make it overwhelming. Blackwell's hands tightened on the folder. The operators inside called for extraction. Air support was 30 minutes out, Apaches from Bagram, the closest assets available. But the compound wouldn't last 30 minutes. The Taliban were bringing up RPGs, preparing to level the building. The men inside had maybe 5 minutes before the structure came down on them. Thorne was in the TOC, 8 miles away. Safe. His job was to coordinate from there. Provide tactical guidance over communications. Direct the rescue operation from a secure location. Do what advisors do, advise not act. Bryn leaned forward. This was her world. TOC operations, intelligence support, command and control from a safe distance. The modern way of war, the smart way, the way that minimized American casualties. But the young SEAL team leader inside the compound froze. First major firefight of his deployment, overwhelming force. He couldn't make the decision to break contact, couldn't order his men to move, couldn't think through the tactical problem. The radio went silent except for gunfire and explosions. No leadership, no coordination, just chaos. Blackwell paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried weight that pressed down on everyone listening. Thorne made a choice. He grabbed a rifle from the armory, an M4 carbine, the standard weapon he'd carried for 40 years. Grabbed a radio. Told the CIA station chief he'd be back. Walked out to the motor pool requisitioned a pickup truck, drove 8 miles through contested territory. He didn't do a solo assault. He didn't try to be a hero. He did something harder. Blackwell looked around the room, making sure everyone understood. He entered a kill zone to give those young operators the leadership they needed. He arrived at the compound under fire. Parked the truck in a defensive position. Started providing covering fire not to eliminate all 60 Taliban, but to give the operators inside space to think, to breathe, to remember their training. He took tactical command, called targets over the radio, directed defensive fire, told the frozen team leader exactly what to do step by step calmly like they were on a training range instead of dying in Afghanistan. Thorne's voice quiet but clear. They just needed someone to tell them they could do it. Someone to believe in them when they didn't believe in themselves. Blackwell nodded. For 23 minutes, Thorne provided covering fire and tactical direction. He was shot twice, once in the left forearm, through and through, kept fighting. Once in the right side, bullet lodged against a rib, still there today. Took shrapnel from an RPG that landed 10 meters away, peppered his back and legs with fragments, some still embedded. But he held that position, kept talking on the radio, kept the young team leader focused, kept the operators fighting smart instead of panicking. And when the Apache gunships finally arrived, when air support showed up and the Taliban broke contact, all 9 Americans were alive. Blackwell's voice dropped. Thorne was the last one in the extraction vehicle. Again, had to be physically carried, because his legs wouldn't work anymore, because the bullet in his side had done more damage than he'd realized, because adrenaline was the only thing keeping him conscious. First words to the medic after they'd loaded everyone else. Did my boys make it? Are they all here? Did everyone come home? The Admiral closed that section of the folder with careful reverence. The Medal of Honor citation is still partially classified. The mission revealed CIA presence in an area we weren't officially operating, acknowledged tactical decisions that bent or broke several international agreements, exposed methods and procedures that remain sensitive even now. But the parts we can share say that Chief Warrant Officer Declan Thorne demonstrated extraordinary heroism and selfless service, that he voluntarily placed himself in mortal danger to save 9 American lives, that he provided leadership under fire when leadership was the difference between survival and catastrophe, that he embodied every value this nation holds dear. Bryn felt something breaking inside her chest, something fundamental shifting in how she understood the world. This morning she'd led from behind a desk, from PowerPoint slides and data analysis and intelligence reports. She'd never put herself at risk, never made herself vulnerable, never stood with her team when it mattered. She'd thought that was strength, professional distance. How officers were supposed to operate. Thorne had shown her it was cowardice. Leadership wasn't a rank or a position or a set of PowerPoint slides. Leadership was being where your people needed you, even when it cost everything, especially when it cost everything. What this shows us, Blackwell said, his gaze finding Bryn across the room holding her eyes, is that leadership isn't about staying safe. It's not about minimizing risk or protecting yourself or making decisions from comfortable distances. Leadership is being where your people need you. It's providing what they need even when it means bleeding, even when it means dying, even when it means sacrificing everything you are for people you barely know. Story 5. Truth 5. The lesson hit Bryn like a physical blow, stealing her breath, making her chest tight. Legacy and wisdom. Story 6, Blackwell said, closing the classified folder and setting it aside. Today, right now, this moment, Thorne looked up from his soup, his winter storm eyes focusing on the Admiral. For 40 years, Blackwell said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent facility, Declan refused every honor, every ceremony, every recognition. We tried annually, sometimes more often, Congressional Medal of Honor Society dinners, SEAL team reunions, veteran events, Pentagon ceremonies, presidential receptions. He said no to everything, refused every invitation, avoided every attempt to honor his service. He paused and the question hung unspoken. So why did he come today? Why, after 4 decades of refusing it, did he finally say yes? Why did he agree to public recognition after spending his entire post-service life trying to remain invisible? The room waited. 30 operators, one shamed captain, all holding their breath. Thorne set down his spoon, stood slowly, that painful rising that spoke of shattered knees and old wounds. Walked toward Bryn with that limping gait, each step deliberate, each movement costing him. Stopped in front of her chair. Captain Callahan, he said, his rough voice carrying clearly despite its quiet tone. You made a mistake today, a significant one. You judged by appearance, by age, by assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't, by surface-level indicators that told you nothing about substance. Bryn felt tears spilling now hot on her cheeks, couldn't stop them, didn't try. But that mistake, Thorne continued and his voice gentled, that was a test, one I helped arrange. Bryn's head snapped up, confusion cutting through shame. What? Blackwell stood, moved to stand beside Thorne. Declan knew you'd be here today, knew you'd had a difficult morning in that briefing, knew you were feeling defensive and angry and diminished. He asked me to delay my arrival by 30 minutes, to let you find him here, to let this situation develop naturally. Why? Bryn's voice broke on the word. Thorne's eyes were gentle now, kind in a way that made the tears flow harder. Because you're one of the best intelligence officers in the Navy. Your analysis has saved lives. Your work matters. The intelligence you provide makes missions possible, makes operators safer, makes the impossible achievable. But you were becoming arrogant, brittle, defensive. You were starting to believe that rank meant wisdom, that youth meant innovation, that old warriors like me were obsolete relics who didn't understand modern warfare. He gestured at the room, at the operators watching. You needed to learn humility, real humility, not the kind that comes from being told you're wrong, the kind that comes from making a catastrophic mistake in front of everyone, from being completely, utterly, publicly wrong, from having your assumptions destroyed so thoroughly you can never rebuild them the same way. Bryn couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The truth, Thorne said quietly, is that true strength isn't never being wrong. Any fool can be confident when they're right. True strength is what you do after you're wrong, whether you learn, whether you grow, whether you become better or just more defensive, whether you let humility make you wise or let pride make you bitter. He held out his hand, that weathered hand with its tremor and scars and accumulated damage. So, Captain, are you going to waste this lesson feeling sorry for yourself? Are you going to let shame paralyze you, or are you going to ask questions? Because we have 20 minutes before the ceremony and I have 40 years of stories. Some might even be useful to a young officer who just learned she doesn't know everything, who just discovered that wisdom comes from unexpected places, who just realized that the quiet ones, the old ones, the overlooked ones might have more to teach than the loud and young and obviously competent. Bryn looked at that extended hand, saw the scars, saw the tremor, saw the strength that had nothing to do with steady fingers and everything to do with accumulated capability, with compound mastery, with decades of choosing service over self. She took his hand. His grip was iron despite the tremor, surprisingly strong. The grip of someone who'd carried wounded brothers, who'd held rifles steady under fire, who'd refused to let age diminish capability. Sir, she said, her voice steadier now, finding strength in his example. Why Redeemer? Why that specific promise? Where did it come from? Thorne smiled, actually smiled, and the expression transformed. His weathered face made him look younger. Made you see the warrior he'd been beneath the old man he'd become. Now you're ready to learn, daughter. Now you're asking the right questions. Sit down. Let's talk. Story 6, Truth 6, the final lesson teaching requires humility from both teacher and student. Wisdom flows both ways. The best leaders never stop learning, never stop questioning, never stop seeking knowledge from unexpected sources. Rank doesn't confer wisdom. Age doesn't guarantee obsolescence. Every person you meet carries knowledge. You don't have experience. You haven't lived lessons you desperately need to learn. Bryn sat, and for the first time in her career, she listened. Really listened. Not to respond, not to defend, not to prove she already knew, just to learn. 20 minutes passed like 20 seconds and 20 hours simultaneously. Time compressed and expanded became meaningless in the presence of truth being shared. Wisdom being transferred, legacy being passed forward. Bryn sat across from Thorne at that corner table, notebook, open pen in hand, writing faster than she'd written since the academy. Not recording every word that would be impossible would miss the meaning in the pauses, the wisdom in the silences. Instead, she captured concepts, ideas, truths that resonated deeper than facts. He told her about the night before that Fallujah mission, the night before he destroyed his knee, retrieving Lance Corporal Hendricks, how he'd almost stayed in the safe house, how he'd sat awake for hours arguing with himself, listing reasons why going back was stupid, was unnecessary, was beyond what anyone could reasonably expect. How fear wasn't something you conquered, it was something you carried with you and did the job anyway. How courage wasn't absence of fear, but action despite it. How every mission started with a moment of choice: let fear control you or control fear long enough to do what needed doing. He told her about the young Marine sniper he'd trained in Kuwait during Desert Storm, the one who'd absorbed every lesson about wind reading and breath control and the fundamentals that never changed. How that same Marine 10 years older had saved Thorne's life in Somalia during those 27 hours. Had been part of the rescue team, had volunteered specifically because he owed Thorne had carried him to the helicopter when blood loss made walking impossible. How teaching wasn't charity, wasn't generosity, was investment. How every skill you passed on multiplied through generations created cascading effects you'd never see, saved lives in ways you'd never know. How the Marine he'd taught in 1991 had trained dozens of other snipers, who'd trained hundreds more, who'd saved thousands of lives across 3 decades of war. Compound knowledge, compound capability, compound legacy. He told her about the importance of knowing when to trust technology and when to trust instinct. How AI could process data faster than any human, could find patterns invisible to organic cognition, could calculate probabilities with mathematical precision. How that was valuable, was necessary, was the future of warfare in many ways. But AI couldn't understand sacrifice, couldn't calculate the value of bringing a fallen brother home, couldn't weigh the cost of leaving someone behind against the risk of going back, couldn't make moral decisions because it had no morality, only algorithms. Technology serves the warrior. The warrior decides, always. And he told her about failure, about the missions that went wrong, that cost lives, that haunted him still, about the operator he didn't reach in time in Bosnia, the one who died because Thorne made a tactical error, chose the wrong route, arrived 3 minutes too late, about carrying that guilt for 30 years, about seeing that young face in dreams, about knowing that your best effort wasn't good enough and having to live with that knowledge. You'll make more mistakes, daughter, Thorne said, his rough voice steady, his winter storm eyes holding hers without judgment. Bigger ones than today, probably. More consequential. Mistakes that cost more than embarrassment. The question isn't whether you fail. Everyone fails. Everyone makes catastrophic errors at some point. The question is whether you learn, whether you get humble or just bitter, whether failure makes you better or just harder, whether you let mistakes destroy you or teach you. Bryn wrote it all down, every concept, every truth, every lesson this legend was giving her freely, without resentment, without making her beg, without holding her earlier arrogance against her. Like a first-year midshipman taking notes from a master instructor. Like someone who'd finally realized how much she didn't know. Like a student ready to learn. Because that's exactly what this was. Education. The kind that mattered. The kind that changed you. Master Chief Wade appeared at Thorne's elbow, his approach respectful, his timing perfect. Sir, Admiral Blackwell says it's time. The auditorium is full, 300 personnel waiting. The ceremony needs to start. Thorne nodded slowly, stood with that painful rising, that vertical journey that spoke of shattered knees and old wounds that never quite healed properly, that reminded everyone watching what service cost, what sacrifice looked like when it accumulated over decades. Come on, Captain, he said to Bryn, his voice carrying gentle command. You're going to want to see this. You're going to want to understand what recognition looks like when it's been delayed for 40 years. When it's been earned 10,000 times over. When it finally happens despite every attempt to avoid it. The ceremony, the base auditorium, held 400 people and every seat was filled. SEAL operators in dress whites and desert camouflage, depending on their duty status and operational schedules. Marine Force recon officers wearing dress blues with chests full of medals. Air Force pararescue in their distinctive berets. CIA officers in civilian clothes with security badges clipped to their belts, present, but officially not present, acknowledged but never named. A dozen flag officers' stars gleaming on shoulder boards. Pentagon brass with faces Bryn recognized from briefings and news coverage. Even a senator from the Armed Services Committee there to witness history, to see a legend honored. The stage was simple, almost austere. American flag on one side standing tall and proud. Navy flag on the other, the anchor, an eagle, and ship, representing centuries of naval tradition. A podium in the center positioned for optimal sightlines. Behind it, a massive screen showing the SEAL trident, the eagle clutching an anchor, a trident, and a flintlock pistol. The symbol of naval special warfare, the icon that represented the deadliest warriors America produced. Bryn found herself walking down the center aisle with Thorne every eye in the auditorium, tracking their movement. She wanted to disappear, to be invisible, to escape the attention and judgment. After what happened in the dining facility, after her public humiliation and catastrophic error, she wanted to cease existing in any meaningful way. But Thorne had other plans, had specifically requested her presence. Captain Callahan, he said, his voice carrying, despite the crowd noise cutting through hundreds of conversations with quiet authority. Front row, next to Admiral Blackwell, that's your seat. Every head turned, 400 people, all watching, all wondering why a disgraced intelligence officer was being honored with a front row seat at a ceremony for a Medal of Honor recipient. All judging, all questioning. Bryn felt the weight of those eyes like physical pressure, like gravity multiplying, like the world pressing down on her shoulders. She walked anyway, down the aisle, to the front, because Thorne had told her to, because she was learning to trust wisdom over comfort. Because sometimes the hardest thing you could do was accept grace you didn't deserve. Blackwell stood as she approached his 4 stars catching stage lights, gestured to the empty seat beside him with a movement that brooked no argument. Captain, Mr. Thorne requested you sit here specifically. Not a suggestion, not a courtesy, an order from a man who's earned the right to give orders to anyone in this room, including me, including you, including everyone. Sir, I don't think I should. What you think is irrelevant, Captain. What Chief Thorne wants is what matters today. Sit down, watch, learn. That's your mission right now. Nothing more, nothing less. Bryn sat her spine rigid, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from trembling. The ceremony began with military precision. A Navy chaplain opened with a prayer. Brief, focused, meaningful. About service and sacrifice. About the cost of freedom and the debt owed to those who paid it. About remembering that warriors bleed so civilians sleep safely. About honoring those who stand between darkness and light. Then Blackwell took the podium, his presence filling the auditorium without needing amplification, his voice carrying authority earned through decades of command. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, each word deliberate, we are here today to honor a warrior who has spent 40 years refusing to be honored. A legend who has spent 4 decades trying to remain invisible. A hero who has consistently, stubbornly, and with great determination avoided every attempt to recognize his extraordinary service to our nation. A wave of quiet laughter rippled through the crowd, affectionate, knowing. The laughter of people who understood what kind of man refused recognition, who appreciated humility in an age of self-promotion. Chief Warrant Officer Declan Thorne served in naval special warfare for 30 years. From 1965, when SEAL teams were still experimental, still proving themselves, still earning their reputation, through 1995 when he officially retired. Though, as many of you know, retirement is a flexible concept for men like Declan. Service doesn't end when the paperwork says it does. Service is a calling, not a career. Blackwell gestured to the massive screen behind him. It flickered to life with a photograph, black and white, grainy with age. A young man in his early 20s, lean and hard and intense, standing with a SEAL team in some jungle clearing. Vietnam-era gear. M16 rifle that looked brand new. Eyes that already held that 1,000-yard stare, that look that came from seeing things most people couldn't imagine. This is Declan Thorne in 1967, age 24, already a combat veteran, already a qualified SEAL, already earning a reputation for the qualities that would define his career. Competence, courage, commitment to bringing brothers home. The screen changed. Color photo now. Desert camouflage. Older Thorne, maybe late 40s, his face more weathered, his eyes harder. Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, based on the endless sand stretching behind him, the flat horizon that defined desert warfare. This is Declan in 1991, Desert Storm, the operation where he saved 23 Marines with 7 impossible shots in a pair of iron sights, where he demonstrated that fundamentals matter more than technology, where he proved that a well-trained operator with basic tools beats an untrained operator with advanced systems every time. Another photo, Somalia, Mogadishu's broken buildings in the background, Thorne in full combat gear, even older now, helping load wounded onto a Black Hawk helicopter. his face exhausted but determined, his body language screaming competence under pressure. This is 1993, 27 hours under fire. 4 men brought home alive when command had written them off. 27 hours that earned him the call sign Redeemer. 27 hours that defined what "never leave a man behind" really means. The photos continued. Iraq, Afghanistan, training facilities. BUD/S candidates learning from a master. Each image showing Thorne aging, graying, accumulating wear and damage, like armor but never softening, never retiring, never stopping. Today, Blackwell said, his voice heavy with emotion barely restrained, we are presenting Chief Thorne with medals that were classified 4 decades. Awards given in secret because the missions were too sensitive to acknowledge. Because the truths we asked him to carry were too heavy to share with a public that couldn't understand. Because some operations remain classified long after the warriors who executed them have grown old. He nodded to 2 aides who stepped forward with synchronized precision, carrying velvet cases that represented decades of valor, sacrifice, and blood. 3 Navy crosses, awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat, for actions above and beyond the call of duty, for valor that inspired those around him and saved American lives, for demonstrating that courage isn't absence of fear but action despite it. The aides opened the cases with reverent care, 3 identical medals. Bronze crosses suspended from blue ribbons with white and red stripes. Simple, beautiful, heavy with meaning. The first was earned in Desert Storm 1991 for actions that saved 23 Marines. The second in Somalia 1993 for 27 hours of sustained combat that extracted 4 survivors. The third in Iraq 2004 for recovering fallen personnel when doing so was deemed impossible. Blackwell paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the auditorium. Each mission is still partially classified. Each citation is still redacted. You can read the public versions on the Navy website, but they're mostly black bars covering details we still can't share. But the men whose lives he saved, dozens of them, are in this room right now. They know what he did. They carry that knowledge every day. They're alive because Declan Thorne refused to leave them behind. Movement throughout the audience. Men standing. SEALs, Marines, Air Force, all rising to their feet without coordination, without orders, just responding to the moment. Not at attention, just standing. Silent tribute. Recognition from those who understood what those medals meant in blood and bone and futures almost lost. Bryn felt tears on her cheeks again. Couldn't stop them. Didn't try. Blackwell's voice thickened, further emotion breaking through professional composure. And finally, the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. An honor fewer than 3,500 Americans have received since Abraham Lincoln signed the first award during the Civil War. A recognition that means you faced death and chose something more important than survival. That you demonstrated valor beyond comprehension. That you embodied every ideal this nation was founded to protect. An aide brought forward a larger case, moving with even greater reverence. Navy blue velvet. When he opened it, the metal inside caught the stage lights like a piece of captured sky. Like crystallized courage, like physical manifestation of sacrifice. The 5-pointed star, the anchor in the center, the word valor inscribed at the bottom. Awarded by presidential authority in 2009 for actions in Kandahar province, Afghanistan. Blackwell said, his voice barely controlled now, for voluntarily placing himself in mortal danger to save 9 American personnel. For extraordinary heroism far beyond the call of duty. For providing leadership under fire when leadership was the difference between catastrophe and survival. For embodying every value this nation holds: dear courage, sacrifice, commitment, brotherhood. He looked at Thorne, who stood off to the side of the stage, uncomfortable in the attention, visibly wanting to be anywhere else, clearly counting the seconds until this was over. Declan, will you please come forward? Thorne walked to the podium with that painful limp, each step costing him, each movement, a reminder of the price he'd paid. The shattered knee from Fallujah. The bullets still lodged in his body from Somalia and Afghanistan. The accumulated damage of 30 years spent in harm's way, 30 years of putting himself between danger and those who needed protecting. The audience stood as one. 400 people. Not applause yet, just respect. Standing witness to a moment 4 decades delayed. Standing recognition of a warrior who'd spent his life avoiding exactly this. Blackwell personally pinned each medal to Thorne's chest. The 3 Navy crosses first arranged in a row, bronze gleaming against the faded windbreaker that Thorne had refused to change for dress uniform. Then the Medal of Honor, the star positioned carefully, the ribbon settling against his chest with the weight of history. Each medal placed with care, with reverence, with hands that trembled slightly from emotion. When he finished, Blackwell stepped back, came to attention, saluted with parade ground precision. A four-star admiral, the highest-ranking officer in the United States Navy, the man who commanded more firepower than most nations possessed, saluting a retired warrant officer in a faded windbreaker. The audience erupted, not polite ceremony applause, real noise, shouting, whistling. The kind of recognition warriors gave to warriors, the kind that came from the gut, from the heart, from understanding exactly what those medals meant in blood, in sleepless nights, in future sacrifice for others. Bryn watched Thorne's face. He stood there uncomfortable, wanting it to be over. Not because he didn't appreciate the honor, but because men like him didn't do the work for medals. They did it because brothers needed bringing home, because promises mattered, because some things were more important than survival or recognition or anything else. The applause continued. 2 minutes, 3, 5. The auditorium shaking with the force of it. Finally, Blackwell raised his hands for quiet. The noise subsided gradually, reluctantly, like waves receding from a beach. Chief Thorne has prepared brief remarks. Thorne stepped to the microphone, cleared his throat. His rough voice filled the auditorium, carried by speakers, but needing no amplification. The voice of a man who'd commanded in combat, who'd led under fire, who knew how to project authority without shouting. I didn't do this for medals. I didn't do this for recognition. I didn't do it for parades or ceremonies or having my picture on walls. He paused. The auditorium was absolutely silent, 400 people holding their breath. I did it because they were my brothers. And brothers don't leave brothers behind ever, for any reason, under any circumstances. That's the only promise that matters. That's the only legacy worth leaving. That's the only thing that counts when you're old and looking back when you're trying to sleep at night, when you're wondering if your life meant something. Another pause, heavier this time. To the young operators here today, your mission isn't to be a hero. Your mission isn't to collect medals or earn recognition or build a reputation. Your mission is to bring everyone home. Dead or alive, they go home. Always. That's the standard. That's the expectation. That's what the trident means. He touched the Medal of Honor on his chest, the gesture unconscious, reverent. This medal doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the 9 men I helped that day in Afghanistan. It belongs to the 23 Marines in Kuwait. It belongs to the 4 survivors in Somalia. It belongs to Lance Corporal Hendrick's mother, who got to bury her son because someone went back for him. It belongs to every operator who ever kept the promise, who ever brought brothers home when doing so was impossible. Thorne's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but the auditorium's acoustics carried it everywhere. Keep the promise. That's all I ask. Keep the promise. Bring them home. Make the hard choices. Pay the cost. Do the impossible. That's what the trident means. That's what being a SEAL means. That's what brotherhood means. Short, direct, 35 words that said everything that needed to be said. Thorne started to step away from the podium, started to retreat back into invisibility, back to the comfortable shadows where legends hide. And Bryn stood up. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it. Her body just moved, propelled by something deeper than conscious thought, by the same instinct that made her confiscate the soup, but pointed in a different direction, now aimed at redemption instead of pride. Walked to the aisle, walked toward the stage. Every step deliberate, every movement certain. 400 people watched. Blackwell looked confused, uncertain. Thorne stopped, turned his winter storm eyes, finding her in the crowd. Bryn climbed the steps to the stage, her heart pounding, her hands shaking, her mind screaming that this was insane, that she should stop, that she was making it worse. She kept walking anyway. Approached the microphone, stood where Thorne had stood, looked out at 400 faces, all watching, all wondering what the hell was happening. Captain Bryn Callahan, she said, her voice shaking but clear, amplified to every corner of the auditorium. Naval Intelligence, 15 years of service, 3 deployments, more commendations than I deserve. And this morning I made the biggest mistake of my career. Silence. Complete total silence. You could have heard a pin drop in the vastness. I confiscated this man's soup. The words hung in the air like smoke, like confession, like truth laid bare for everyone to see. I judged him by his appearance, by his age, by my assumption that someone who looked like him, old, frail, wearing discount store clothes, didn't belong in a space reserved for operators, for warriors, for people who'd earned the right to be there. Bryn's voice steadied as she found her rhythm, found her courage, found the strength to be vulnerable in front of hundreds. I was arrogant. I was wrong. And I humiliated him in front of his brothers, in front of the men he'd bled with, in front of people who understood his worth in ways I couldn't comprehend. She looked out at the crowd, at all those watching faces, and continued, "But he didn't want me punished. He didn't want me humiliated in return. He didn't want revenge or discipline or any of the things military justice would have supported. He wanted to teach me." And in 20 minutes of conversation in a dining facility, Chief Thorne taught me more about leadership than 15 years of service ever did. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. He taught me that technology serves the warrior, not the other way around. That fundamentals matter more than fancy equipment. That patience is a weapon. That leadership has real costs measured in bone and blood and futures you sacrifice. That teaching matters more than personal glory. That true leadership means being where your people need you, even when it costs everything you are. Bryn turned to face Thorne, directly met those winter storm eyes that had seen too much and never looked away. And he taught me that strength isn't never being wrong. It's what you do after you're wrong. Whether you learn, whether you grow, whether you become better or just more defensive. Whether you let mistakes destroy you or teach you. She looked back at the audience, at 400 people who'd gone from confused to engaged, from questioning to understanding. I thought authority meant never showing weakness, never admitting mistakes, never being vulnerable. I thought leadership was about being the smartest person in the room, about having all the answers, about never needing help, about proving I belong through competence and confidence and never ever admitting uncertainty. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. I was wrong about all of it, completely catastrophically wrong. The admission hung in the air like lightning, like thunder, like truth that couldn't be unsaid. I have imposter syndrome. I doubt myself constantly. I overcompensate by being rigid and defensive and dismissive of people who threaten my carefully constructed competence. I push away help because asking for it feels like failure. I avoid vulnerability because showing weakness feels like surrender. Bryn felt tears on her cheeks, now hot and shameful and liberating all at once. And this morning when I needed it most, Chief Thorne showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness. That admitting you don't know everything isn't failure. That learning from people with more experience isn't surrendering authority, it's building it. It's earning it. It's demonstrating the humility that makes real leadership possible. She looked at Thorne again, her vision blurred with tears. "Sir, I'm sorry, not just for the soup, but for every assumption I made. Every veteran I dismissed as outdated. Every older officer I wrote off as obsolete. Every time I chose ego over wisdom. Every time I prioritized being right over being effective. Every time I let pride make me small, instead of letting humility make me better." Bryn's voice dropped to almost a whisper, carried by microphones to every corner. "Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for patience I didn't deserve. Thank you for seeing potential in someone who had just treated you with disrespect. Thank you for being the leader I aspire to become. Thank you for showing me what service really means." She stepped back from the microphone, her part said, her confession complete. The auditorium erupted again. But different this time. Not just applause for a medal or a legend. Applause for courage of a different kind. For the bravery of public vulnerability. For choosing growth over pride. For demonstrating that strength sometimes looks like admitting weakness. Thorne walked to her, moving with that painful limp, each step deliberate. His winter storm eyes were gentle, now warm in a way that made the tears flow harder. "Now you're ready to lead, daughter," he said quietly, just for her, though the microphones caught it and carried it to everyone. "Because you understand that command isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing when to listen, when to learn, when to be vulnerable enough to grow. That's the difference between authority and leadership. One demands obedience, the other inspires devotion." He held out his hand, that weathered hand with its tremor and scars. She took it, and in front of 400 people, the 82-year-old legend and the 37-year-old officer shook hands like equals, like teacher and student, like father and daughter, like two warriors who understood that the hardest battles weren't fought with weapons, but with honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to change. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. 7 minutes of 400 people acknowledging not just medals earned decades ago, but transformation happening in real time. Not just honoring a legend, but witnessing the birth of a better leader. When it finally subsided, when people sat back down, when the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, Bryn found herself walking out of the auditorium with Thorne, the two of them moving slowly to accommodate his damaged knee. "What now?" she asked quietly. "Now you go back to work," Thorne said. "You lead your team, you make intelligence assessments, you do your job, but you do it differently. You listen more. You assume less. You stay humble. You keep learning. You become the leader your people need, not the leader your ego wants to be. Will I see you again? Thorne smiled, that rare expression that transformed his weathered face. Every Tuesday and Thursday. Same corner table, same soup. You're welcome to join me whenever you want. We'll talk. We'll share stories. I'll teach you things the Academy never covered. And maybe eventually you'll have things to teach me. That's how wisdom works. It flows both ways when people are humble enough to receive it. They parted at the auditorium exit, Thorne heading toward his car, Bryn heading back to her office. But something fundamental had changed. In her, in how she saw the world, in how she understood leadership and service, and what it meant to wear the uniform. She was different now. Better. Still flawed, still learning, still making mistakes. But humble enough to admit it, strong enough to grow. Wise enough to know that education never ended, that every person carried knowledge worth receiving, that age and appearance revealed nothing about substance, that legends didn't always wear their medals. Sometimes they wore windbreakers and ate soup and changed lives with 20 minutes of conversation. 6 months later, winter rain hammered San Diego with the kind of persistence that made you believe the drought was finally truly over. The bay churned gray and angry whitecaps forming where usually only gentle swells rolled. The Naval Special Warfare compound looked different in the rain, softer, somehow more human. Less like a monument to warrior culture, and more like a place where real people did hard work. Commander Bryn Callahan, promoted 2 weeks ago, the new rank still feeling foreign on her shoulders, walked into the SEAL dining facility, carrying 2 bowls of soup, steam rising from both the scent of chicken and herbs and comfort filling the space around her. The place was quieter today, afternoon shift between training cycles, maybe 20 people scattered at tables eating quickly before heading back to ranges and briefings and the endless grind that kept operators sharp. At the corner table near the windows where rain streaked the glass in patterns that looked almost artistic, sat an old man in a faded windbreaker. Bryn smiled, her first genuine smile in a day filled with meetings and decisions and the weight of new responsibilities. She set down both bowls, sat across from him without asking permission, without seeking invitation, comfortable now in a way she'd never been before. "Chicken noodle today," she said. "Your favorite." Thorne looked at the soup at her, his hands reaching for the bowl with their characteristic tremor. "You brought extra," he said, "planning to stay if you have time. For you, daughter, always." 6 months, half a year, 182 days since the ceremony, since her public confession, since the moment everything changed. And everything had changed. Bryn had transformed. Not overnight, real change never happened that way. But gradually, deliberately, through conscious effort and constant vigilance, she'd become a different kind of leader. She still relied on intelligence, analysis, on data, on careful planning. But now she balanced it with human wisdom, with listening to veterans who'd lived what she only studied, with understanding that experience wasn't obsolete, but foundational, wasn't outdated, but timeless, wasn't weakness, but accumulated strength. Her team had noticed immediately. The junior analysts who used to fear her now sought her guidance, saw her office as a safe space instead of a judgment zone. The veteran intelligence officers who used to avoid her now volunteered for her projects, recognized that she valued their knowledge instead of dismissing it. She'd learned to ask for help, to admit uncertainty, to say, "I don't know," without feeling like it diminished her authority, to lead with humility instead of rigid certainty. And it worked. Her assessments had improved dramatically, becoming more nuanced, more accurate, more useful to the operators who depended on them. Her teams functioned better, collaborated more effectively, produced higher quality work. Her reputation had shifted from brilliant but brittle to brilliant and collaborative, from competent but isolated to competent and connected. The promotion to commander had come early, accompanied by a new assignment running the intelligence fusion cell for all West Coast SEAL operations, a position usually reserved for officers with 20-plus years of experience. She was 37, but more important than the promotion was what she'd built. "How's the program?" Thorne asked, reading her mind the way he always did, understanding what mattered without needing explanation. 112 officers enrolled now," Bryn said, pride evident in her voice. 37 veterans serving as mentors. "We're expanding to the East Coast next quarter. They're calling it the Redeemer Leadership Program officially now. It's in Navy regulations. Part of professional development for all intelligence officers." Thorne almost smiled, his weathered face showing something like satisfaction mixed with embarrassment. "You didn't have to name it after me." "I absolutely did. It's your philosophy, your lessons, your legacy. Teaching through experience, Compound knowledge, never leaving people behind, even when what they need is wisdom instead of rescue, even when the battlefield is a briefing room instead of a war zone. The program matched junior officers with retired special operations veterans. Not for combat training, they had other programs for that. For leadership mentoring. For learning the lessons that couldn't be taught in classrooms or found in manuals. For understanding that wisdom accumulated over decades had value that exceeded any technological advantage. Thorne was the lead instructor. Twice a month he came to the compound, shared stories, answered questions, taught young officers what 40 years of service actually meant, what sacrifice looked like when it accumulated over a career, what leadership demanded when lives depended on your decisions. The impact had been extraordinary. Officers who completed the program showed measurably better leadership scores, higher team satisfaction ratings, more effective decision-making under pressure. The data was clear. The results were undeniable. Teaching worked. Legacy mattered. Wisdom transferred. They ate soup in comfortable silence for a while, rain drumming on the roof in rhythms that felt almost musical, steam rising from bowls. Two people who'd started as adversaries and become something deeper than friends. Teacher and student, father and daughter. Two warriors separated by decades but connected by shared understanding of what service meant, what leadership demanded, what brotherhood required. Finally, Thorne spoke, his voice quiet, his rough tones softened by emotion. "You remind me of her." Bryn looked up from her soup. "Her my daughter, Mackenzie." His voice gentled with memory, with loss that time had softened, but never eliminated. She was brilliant, driven, wanted to prove herself constantly in a world that questioned whether women belonged in military service. Joined the Navy right out of college. Became an intelligence officer, actually. Just like you, same career path, same struggles, same determination to demonstrate competence through perfection. Bryn set down her spoon, carefully gave him her full attention. Thorne had never mentioned a daughter in 6 months of Tuesday and Thursday lunches, 6 months of stories and lessons and shared meals. "She struggled with the same things you did," Thorne continued, his hands trembling more now. Emotion breaking through the careful control he usually maintained. Imposter syndrome, overcompensating for perceived weakness, being so afraid of failure she couldn't accept help, building walls instead of bridges, choosing isolation over vulnerability because vulnerability felt like surrender. Past tense, struggled, did, was. The words carried weight that pressed down like gravity. "What happened?" Bryn asked gently, already knowing the answer would hurt, already bracing for pain she couldn't prevent. "Cancer, pancreatic, aggressive, diagnosed at age 34, dead at 35. Thorne's hands shook harder, soup sloshing slightly in his bowl. 15 years ago this month, actually. February, cold and raining, just like today. Like the world knew to mourn. He set down his spoon, couldn't hold it steady anymore. She never let anyone help her through it. Didn't want to seem weak. Didn't want to burden anyone. Didn't want her colleagues to see her as less capable because she was sick. Refused to take medical leave. Worked until 3 weeks before she died. Refused visitors in the hospital. Refused support from friends and family." His voice cracked, decades of grief breaking through. Died alone in a hospital room at 3 in the morning because she was too proud to ask her old man to visit. Too independent to admit she needed someone. Too strong to be vulnerable. I got the call from a nurse I'd never met telling me my daughter was gone, telling me she'd been alone, telling me she'd asked for no one. Bryn felt tears burning, felt her throat closing, felt the weight of that loss, even though it wasn't hers to carry. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry." Thorne's voice was firm despite the emotion carrying command even in grief. "Be better. Be the version of her I wish she could have been. Strong enough to be vulnerable. Brave enough to ask for help. Wise enough to learn from people who love you instead of pushing them away, because accepting love feels like admitting weakness." He reached across the table, took her hand with both of his. The trembling stopped, by contact, by connection, by the human touch that reminded both of them they weren't alone. "That's why I came to the ceremony 6 months ago. Not for the medals, I've refused those for 40 years and would have kept refusing if I could. Not for recognition, not for applause or standing ovations, or having my picture on walls." His winter storm eyes held hers and she saw tears there, saw pain that 40 years of warrior discipline couldn't fully hide. "For you, for her, for every young officer who needs to learn what took me a lifetime to understand. What Mackenzie never learned. What cost her everything because pride made her small instead of letting humility make her great." Thorne's voice dropped to a whisper, each word weighted with the accumulated sorrow of 15 years. That strength isn't measured in how much you can carry alone. It's measured in how well you bring people with you. That leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being human. That vulnerability is strength, not weakness. That asking for help is courage, not cowardice. That the greatest legacy isn't what you accomplish alone, it's who you help become better. He squeezed her hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite the tremor. You're the daughter I couldn't save. You're the second chance I didn't deserve. You're proof that teaching matters, that one conversation can change a life, that humility is the beginning of wisdom, that transformation is possible when people are brave enough to admit they need to change. Tears streamed down Bryn's face now, unchecked, unashamed. I won't waste it, she whispered, her voice breaking. I promise, I'll be better. I'll stay humble. I'll keep learning. I'll help others the way you helped me. I'll pass it forward. I'll honor her memory by being what she couldn't be. Good. Thorne's voice steadied, his command presence returning. Because the Navy needs leaders like you. The new generation needs mentors who understand that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites. They're partners. That the best leaders are the ones who've been broken and rebuilt themselves, stronger, wiser, better. He released her hand, picked up his spoon again. Now eat your soup before it gets cold. We've got work to do. I have 3 new stories to tell you today. Lessons about leading teams through uncertainty, about making decisions with incomplete information, about trusting your people when trust feels risky. Bryn laughed through tears, the sound watery but genuine. Always teaching. Always learning, Thorne corrected. Both of us. That's the deal. I teach you my lessons. You teach me yours. Wisdom flows both ways when people are humble enough to receive it. That's what makes this work. That's what makes legacy possible. They ate 2 bowls of soup on a rainy afternoon, an 82-year-old legend and a 37-year-old commander. Teacher and student, father and daughter, past and future, legacy and transformation. Outside, the rain continued washing the world clean, preparing the ground for new growth. Inside, warmth and soup and wisdom passed between generations, between 2 people connected by shared understanding that service meant more than wearing a uniform, that leadership demanded more than issuing orders, that brotherhood extended beyond blood and gender and age to encompass anyone brave enough to be vulnerable, humble enough to learn, strong enough to change. This was how legends survived. Not through medals displayed in glass cases or photographs hung on walls or names carved in stone. Through teaching, through passing wisdom forward, through finding the next generation and making them better than you were, through accepting that your greatest achievement wasn't what you did, but who you helped become capable of doing things you never could. Through redemption that flowed both ways, Thorne saving Bryn from arrogance, Bryn giving Thorne a second chance with the daughter he'd lost. Both of them teaching each other that growth never stopped, that education never ended, that every day offered opportunities to become better. If you were humble enough to see them, the camera, if there had been a camera, if someone had been filming this moment, would pull back slowly, cinematic, deliberate. 2 people at a corner table, rain on windows, steam rising from bowls like incense in a temple, an old man in a faded windbreaker with medals in a box at home, a young woman in uniform with new rank on her shoulders and old wisdom in her heart. 2 warriors, 2 generations, 2 souls connected by the understanding that the hardest battles weren't fought with weapons, but with honesty and vulnerability and the courage to admit you didn't have all the answers. 2 bowls of soup, 2 lives transformed, 2 futures made better by the wisdom to learn from each other. And somewhere in whatever place existed beyond this world, a young woman named Mackenzie smiled, proud of her father for finally sharing his pain, proud of Bryn for learning the lessons she never could, proud that her death had meaning, had purpose, had become part of a legacy that would help others avoid her mistakes. Redemption, legacy, transformation, love, all present in 2 bowls of soup, shared on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. All contained in the simple act of an old warrior teaching a young leader that strength looked like vulnerability, that leadership looked like humility, that the greatest power was the courage to change. The rain fell, the soup steamed, the lessons continued. And 2 people separated by 45 years and connected by shared understanding ate together in comfortable silence, both knowing that this moment mattered, that this connection changed them, that this legacy would extend far beyond either of their lives. Bringing brothers home meant more than rescue from enemy fire. Sometimes it meant rescuing people from themselves, from pride, from fear, from the belief that strength meant standing alone. Sometimes the greatest mission was learning to accept help, to listen to wisdom, to be vulnerable enough to grow, to bring everyone home, including yourself. Epilogue. 2 years later, the Redeemer Leadership Program graduated its 500th officer on a Thursday in spring. The ceremony was small, intimate, held in the same auditorium where Thorne had received his Medal of Honor 30 months earlier. Commander Bryn Callahan, on track for captain, recommended by every officer in her chain of command, stood at the podium addressing the graduates. "Chief Thorne can't be with us today," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion. "He passed away peacefully last month at home, surrounded by people who loved him. He was 84. He served for 30 years, taught for 20 more, and changed thousands of lives, including mine." She paused, looking at the 500 graduates assembled, at the veterans who'd volunteered as mentors at the legacy Thorne had built. But his lessons remain. His wisdom continues. His legacy lives in every one of you, in every officer who chooses humility over pride, in every leader who admits uncertainty instead of faking confidence, in every person who understands that strength looks like vulnerability, that courage looks like asking for help, that the greatest power is the willingness to change. Bryn held up 2 photographs, one of Thorne in his 20s, young and hard and intense, one of him at 82, old and weathered and wise. "He taught me that leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being human. That service means bringing everyone home from battlefields and from themselves. That teaching matters more than personal achievement. That legacy is measured in lives changed, not medals earned." She set down the photographs, looked directly at the audience. "So today, as you graduate, as you begin leading teams and making decisions and shaping the future of our Navy, remember one thing." A pause, letting the moment build. "Legends don't always wear their medals. Sometimes they wear windbreakers. Sometimes they eat soup in corner tables. Sometimes they teach with patience instead of commanding with authority. Sometimes they change the world one conversation at a time." Bryn's voice strengthened, carrying Thorne's lessons forward. "Honor his memory by being the leaders he taught you to be. Stay humble. Keep learning. Never stop growing. And when you're old and looking back, when you're wondering if your service mattered, remember this. Your greatest achievement won't be what you did. It will be who you helped become better. That's the only legacy that matters. That's the only mission that counts. Bring them home. All of them, always. Redeemed forever." The graduates stood. Applause filled the auditorium. And somewhere, in whatever place legends go when their work is done, an old warrior smiled. His soup was finished. His mission was complete. His brothers were home. All of them.